A gripping tale of betrayal and revenge, where a husband uncovers his cheating wife's secrets. This story about betrayal follows Jake as he battles his unfaithful wife's lies, protecting his daughter and reclaiming his life. Packed with tension and emotional stakes, the wife's betrayal unravels in a web of deceit. Subscribe for more stories of trust shattered and justice served. Don't miss this intense journey into the heart of a family torn by infidelity. He leaned back in his chair, the creak of leather the only sound in the room. Ellie was good, careful, but not careful enough. She deleted texts, but the cloud backups didn't forget. She lied about locations, but GPS metadata in her selfies told the truth. And the photos she thought were private? They were Jake's now, each one a nail in the coffin of her charade. His next move was riskier. He needed more than digital proof. He needed something undeniable, something that would hold up in court if it came to that. Through a contact in hotel security, a former client who owed him for a rushed renovation, Jake secured access to the Marriott's hallway footage. The video was grainy, but clear enough. Ellie, arm looped through Trevor's, giggling as they entered room 204. Trevor's hand slid lower, and Ellie didn't pull away. The timestamp burned into Jake's memory. 8:03 p.m., March 18th. He didn't stop there. Jake hacked into Ellie's notes app, where she jotted things she didn't want in texts. One entry, dated a week ago, read, Trevor, Weston, room 312. Use Karen's party as excuse next time. Another, he's so predictable, work, home, sleep. This is too easy. The words stung, but they also fueled him. Ellie thought he was blind. A predictable husband too buried in blueprints to notice her slipping away. That was her mistake. Jake's spreadsheet grew. Dates, locations, transactions. He tracked her Uber rides, which she thought vanished with the app's delete feature. Cloud storage begged to differ. He found a charge for a bottle of wine at a bar called the Velvet Room, a place she'd never mentioned, on a night she'd claimed to be exhausted at home. Every lie was a thread, and Jake was weaving them into a net she couldn't escape. But then came the curveball. Ellie was getting bolder. Last night, she'd come home at 1 a.m., her perfume stronger, her excuses thinner. Book club was at Julie's. She's going through a divorce, needed to vent, she'd said, avoiding his eyes. Jake nodded, but the cloud had already told a different story. A text to Trevor at 10:17 p.m. Your trouble. Can't stop thinking about tonight. And a reply, good. Let's make it a habit. The audacity of it lit a fire in Jake's chest, but he smothered it. Rage was a weak foundation. Strategy was stronger. He contacted Lisa White, a divorce attorney known in Seattle for dismantling cases with surgical precision. Lisa's office was all glass and steel, a chessboard where she played to win. Jake slid a USB drive across her desk, containing his dossier. Texts, photos, videos, bank records. This is just the start, he said. Lisa skimmed the files, her silver bob catching the light as she nodded. You've done half my job already, she said, her voice cool but approving. What's the end game? Jake's answer was simple. I want her out. No house, no money, no lies left to tell. And I want my daughter protected. Lisa closed her laptop. Consider it done. Back home, Ellie was oblivious, humming as she chopped vegetables for dinner. Jake watched her from the doorway, his face unreadable. She was playing the perfect wife now, but the act was brittle, like glass waiting to shatter. You're quiet tonight, she said, glancing over her shoulder with a playful smile. Work stressing you out? Jake tilted his head, letting her words hang. Just thinking, he said, his tone so even it made her pause, about how well you've been managing your time lately. Her knife slowed, just for a moment, but she recovered with a laugh. Oh, you know me, queen of multitasking. She turned back to the cutting board, but her shoulders were tense, betraying the crack in her confidence. He didn't push. Not yet. Instead, He retreated to his office, where the cloud pinged again. Another message from Trevor. Tomorrow, 9 p.m., the Velvet Room. Wear that dress again. Jake's jaw tightened, but a grim smile tugged at his lips. Ellie thought she was pulling the strings, dancing on the edge of a cliff she couldn't see. But Jake was no puppet. He was the architect, and her fall was already in motion. Sophie's laughter filled the Carter house, a rare burst of light in a home heavy with secrets. The 22-year-old had driven up from Portland for the weekend. Her silver Honda parked crookedly in the driveway, a bumper sticker proclaiming "Adventure awaits" clinging to its edge. Jake watched her from the dining room, his heart aching with a love that made what he was about to do even harder. Seattle's clouds parted briefly, letting slants of sunlight spill through the windows, but the warmth couldn't touch the storm brewing inside. Ellie was in full performance mode, playing the perfect mother and wife. The table was set with her signature roast chicken, candles flickering, and a jazz playlist humming softly from the Bluetooth speaker. She laughed too loudly, touched Jake's arm too often, as if her affection could erase the truth he'd spent weeks uncovering. Sophie, oblivious, soaked it in, her eyes bright with the comfort of a family evening she hadn't had in months. Jake's fingers tightened around his fork, the metal cool against his callous skin. He'd been building toward this moment, collecting evidence of Ellie's betrayal, texts, hotel footage, bank records, all locked in a digital vault. But tonight wasn't about Ellie. It was about Sophie, his daughter, who deserved to know the truth before the lies tore her world apart. He'd shielded her long enough. Dinner passed in a blur of small talk. Sophie shared stories about her environmental science classes, her new job at a sustainability nonprofit, and a hiking trip she'd planned in the Cascades. Ellie nodded along, her smile practiced, but Jake caught the way her eyes darted to her phone, screen down on the counter. Another secret, another lie. He waited until the plates were cleared, until Ellie stepped into the kitchen to grab dessert, before making his move. "Soph," he said quietly, leaning across the table. "We need to talk." Sophie's brow furrowed, her easy grin fading. "What's up, Dad? You're freaking me out." Jake's throat tightened, but he pushed through, sliding his tablet toward her. "This isn't easy, but you need to see it." He opened the folder labeled Truth, revealing a curated selection of Ellie's sins. A text to Trevor King. "He's clueless. Meet me at the Velvet Room, 9 p.m. A grainy still from the Marriott security camera, Ellie's face unmistakable as she entered room 204. A bank charge for a $150 bottle of wine on a night she'd claimed to be at yoga. Sophie's eyes widened, her breath catching as she scrolled. This can't be right," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Mom wouldn't—" She stopped, her gaze locking on a selfie of Ellie, laughing in a hotel bar, Trevor's arm around her waist. The timestamp was brutal. 2 weeks ago, when Sophie had called her mom to chat, only to be told she was too busy for a long talk. Jake reached for her hand, but she pulled away, her face crumpling. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "A few weeks," Jake said, his tone steady despite the ache in his chest. "I needed proof. For you. For us." Sophie's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry, not yet. She shoved the tablet back, her chair scraping against the hardwood. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Before Jake could answer, Ellie swept back into the room, a tray of lemon tarts in her hands. "Who's ready for?" Her words died as she saw Sophie's face, the tablet glowing between them. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice sharp, the tray clattering onto the table. Jake stood, slow and deliberate, and slid an envelope across to her. "It's over, Ellie. The business, the house. It's all in Sophie's trust now. You're cut off." Ellie's laugh was brittle, disbelieving. "You're joking, right? This is insane." But her eyes flicked to the envelope, and her hands trembled as she tore it open. Inside were legal documents, signed and notarized, transferring Carter Construction and their savings into an irrevocable trust for Sophie. Lisa White's name was stamped at the bottom, a guarantee of finality. Ellie's face drained of color. "You can't do this," she stammered. "I'm your wife." "Are you?" Jake's voice was low, cutting. "Were you my wife in room 204? Or at the Velvet Room with Trevor?" The names landed like blows, and Ellie flinched, her facade cracking. Sophie stood, her fists clenched. "Mom, is it true?" she demanded, her voice breaking. Ellie's mouth opened, but no words came. She looked to Jake, searching for a lifeline, but found only steel in his eyes. "Sophie, honey, it's not—" Ellie started, but Sophie cut her off. "Don't lie to me." Her shout echoed, raw and wounded. "I trusted you. We all did." She turned to Jake, her eyes blazing with hurt and fury. "I need air." Before either could stop her, she grabbed her jacket and stormed out, the front door slamming so hard the candles flickered. Ellie sank into a chair, her hands covering her face. "You've ruined everything," she whispered. But Jake didn't budge. "No, Ellie," he said, his voice cold as the rain outside. "You did that all on your own." He walked to the window, watching Sophie's silhouette disappear down the street. The truth had shattered her trust, but it had also set her free. And Jake wasn't done yet. Ellie's reckoning was just beginning. Ellie's heels clicked against the pavement, her sundress catching the late afternoon breeze as she mingled at the Belltown block party. Her laughter rang out, too bright, too forced, a mask for the cracks spreading through her world. Jake Carter stood by the grill, a beer in hand, watching her play the role of the perfect neighbor, oblivious to the storm he was about to unleash. Seattle's summer sun hung low, casting long shadows over the crowded street. Kids darted between picnic tables, their squeals mixing with the sizzle of burgers and the hum of classic rock from a portable speaker. The annual barbecue was Belltown's pride, a showcase of community spirit where everyone pretended their lives were as tidy as their lawns. Ellie thrived in this spotlight, her smile dazzling as she swapped stories with neighbors, a gin and tonic sweating in her hand. To them, she was still the charming Mrs. Carter, the woman who organized charity drives and never missed a book club. But Jake knew the truth, and tonight so would they. The confrontation with Sophie 3 days ago had left the Carter house silent, a battlefield of unspoken wounds. Sophie hadn't returned Jake's calls, her texts limited to a curt, "Need space, Dad." Ellie, meanwhile, had doubled down on denial, acting as if the legal papers transferring their assets to Sophie's trust were a bluff. She'd even tried to charm Jake last night, cooking his favorite steak and wearing a dress that clung to memories of better days. "We can fix this, Jake," she'd pleaded, her voice syrupy. He'd left the plate untouched and walked away, her tears falling on a table set for a reconciliation that would never come. Now, as Ellie laughed with Julie from next door, Jake felt the weight of his plans settle into place. He'd spent weeks building a dossier, texts, hotel footage, bank records, each piece a brick in the wall of her deception. But exposing her to Sophie wasn't enough. Ellie's lies had tainted their community, their shared life, and Jake wanted her to feel the consequences in the place she valued most, her reputation. He waited until Mike, the block party's host, took the microphone to thank the crowd. The chatter quieted, glasses raised in anticipation of a cheerful toast. Jake stepped forward, his work boots scuffing the asphalt, and cleared his throat. "Mind if I say a few words, Mike?" The older man grinned, handing over the mic. "All yours, Jake." Ellie's head snapped up, her smile faltering as she sensed the shift in the air. Jake raised his beer, his voice steady but resonant, carrying over the crowd. "To Belltown," he began, his eyes locking on Ellie's. "To neighbors who stand by each other. To truth. And to those who learn, too late, that one choice can cost you everything." The words hung heavy, their meaning clear to anyone paying attention. Ellie froze, her glass halfway to her lips, the color draining from her face. Whispers rippled through the crowd, heads turning as neighbors exchanged glances. Jake didn't need to say more. He'd already planted the seeds. 2 days ago, he'd accidentally left a printed screenshot of Ellie's text to Trevor. He's clueless. Velvet Room, 9 p.m. In the community center's copy room, where Julie's husband, a notorious gossip, had found it. The rumor mill had done the rest, whispers spreading like wildfire. Now, Jake's toast was the spark, and Ellie's carefully crafted image was the kindling. She tried to recover, forcing a laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "Oh, Jake, always so dramatic," she called, waving a hand as if it were a joke. But her voice cracked, and the neighbors' eyes weren't on her charm anymore. They were on her panic. Julie stepped back, her smile tight. Another neighbor, Tom, raised an eyebrow, his wife whispering something that made him nod slowly. The crowd's warmth had turned to scrutiny, and Ellie felt it like a spotlight burning through her. Jake handed the mic back to Mike, who fumbled through a hasty thank you, sensing the tension. Ellie's gaze darted to Jake, pleading for a reprieve, but he met her eyes with a cool nod, as if to say, "You brought this on yourself." She clutched her drink, her knuckles white, and excused herself to check on the dessert table. But as she moved through the crowd, conversations hushed, and eyes followed her. The Belltown she'd ruled was slipping away, and she knew it. By the time the sun dipped below the skyline, Ellie stood alone near the drink cooler, her sundress no longer a symbol of confidence but a costume that didn't fit. Neighbors avoided her, their polite smiles replaced by sidelong glances. Jake watched from a distance, his face unreadable. He hadn't shouted her secrets from the rooftops. He didn't need to. The truth, once seated, had a way of growing on its own. As the party wound down, Ellie approached him, her voice low and trembling. "You think you've won, don't you?" she hissed, her eyes wet with fury and fear. Jake tilted his head, his voice calm but razor-sharp. "This isn't about winning, Ellie. It's about living with what you've done." He walked away, leaving her to face the crowd's judgment alone. The trap was tightening, and the final blow was yet to come. Ellie's world crumbled in the silence of a house that no longer belonged to her. The morning sun filtered through the blinds, illuminating a kitchen where her coffee sat untouched, cold as the reality she could no longer escape. Jake Carter had dismantled her life with the precision of a man who built homes to last. And now, as she stood alone, the weight of her choices pressed down like a collapsing roof. Seattle's drizzle painted the windows, a soft patter that underscored the emptiness of the Carter home. The Belltown block party 3 days ago had been the tipping point. Jake's toast, laced with truth, had turned neighbors' smiles into whispers, stripping Ellie of the social pedestal she'd clung to. Sophie, their daughter, hadn't answered her calls since the night she learned of her mother's betrayal. Her silence wound deeper than any argument. Even Trevor King, the slick realtor who'd fueled Ellie's reckless escape, had vanished, his social media locked, his number disconnected. She was a ghost in her own story, and Jake had orchestrated it all. The final blow came at dawn. Jake had left the house before sunrise, his duffel bag packed with essentials. Work clothes, tools, a photo of him and Sophie at her college graduation. He'd stood in the living room, watching Ellie sleep on the couch, her mascara smudged from a night of futile tears. She tried to salvage things after the party, cornering him with promises of therapy, of change. "I was lost, Jake," she'd pleaded, her voice breaking. "I'll cut him off. We can start over." But Jake's response was a quiet, "You don't get to rewrite the ending." Now, as Ellie stirred, she saw the envelope on the coffee table, its crisp edges stark against the clutter of her unraveling life. Her hands trembled as she opened it, revealing divorce papers, signed and notarized by Lisa White, the attorney whose name alone promised finality. Attached was a notice. The house, Carter Construction, and all assets had been transferred to Sophie's irrevocable trust. Ellie had 1 week to vacate. Her breath caught, a sob choking in her throat. "No," she whispered, scanning the pages as if they might change. He can't. But he had. Jake had spent weeks weaving a net of evidence. Texts, hotel footage, bank records, that left no room for her to maneuver. The bank had locked her out of their accounts. Her credit cards declined at the grocery store yesterday, leaving her with a single bag of essentials and a cashier's pitying glance. She'd called Jake, her voice tight with panic, but his response was dry. "Must be a glitch. I'll look into it." She knew now it was no glitch, it was his design. Ellie stood, pacing the kitchen, her bare feet cold against the hardwood. She grabbed her phone, scrolling through contacts who no longer answered. Julie, her book club confidant, had ghosted her. Her sister sent a clipped text. "Keep your mess out of our family." 31 calls to Sophie, 6 texts, 2 emails, all unanswered. Her last message, a single please, had been read but ignored. The phone slipped from her hand, landing with a thud that echoed her isolation. She sank into a chair, staring at the family photos on the wall. Birthdays, vacations, moments she'd staged for likes and validation. They mocked her now, reminders of a life she'd gambled and lost. Trevor was gone, the thrill of his attention replaced by the shame of his absence. The neighbors who once fawned over her now crossed the street to avoid her. And Sophie, her only child, was a stranger, her trust shattered by the truth Jake had laid bare. Miles away, on the shores of Puget Sound, Jake sat with Sophie, their fishing rods propped against a weathered dock. The water lapped gently, reflecting a sky bruised with clouds. They hadn't spoken much, the silence between them comfortable, healing. Sophie passed him a thermos of coffee, her fingers brushing his. "Thanks for telling me the truth," she said softly, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. Jake nodded, his throat tight. "I'd do anything for you, kid." They didn't talk about Ellie. There was no need. Sophie leaned her head against his shoulder, and for the first time in weeks, Jake felt the weight lift. He hadn't won. There was no victory in a broken family, but he'd rebuilt what mattered. Piece by piece, he'd protected Sophie, reclaimed their future, and let Ellie face the consequences of her choices. Back at the house, Ellie opened the front door, the morning air sharp with the scent of wet pine. She stepped onto the porch, barefoot, her eyes scanning a street that no longer welcomed her. A neighbor's car slowed, then sped up, the driver avoiding her gaze. Her phone buzzed spam, offering a credit card she couldn't qualify for. She laughed, a bitter sound, and set the device down, its weight heavier than she could bear. Jake hadn't just taken the house or the money. He'd taken her place, her power, her illusion of control. And he'd done it not with rage, but with silence, a weapon she'd never seen coming. As she stood there, the truth settled in. Her choices had cost her everything, and no amount of tears could rebuild what she'd torn down. The moral was clear, etched in the quiet of her empty home. Betrayal doesn't just break trust, it dismantles lives. For Jake and Sophie, the path forward was one of healing, built on honesty. For Ellie, it was a lesson learned too late. The truth, once spoken, leaves no room for lies.